As one of the premier 2 Paragon successors alongside Overprime, Predecessor aims to recreate the original successor Paragon with its own unique twists and break into the third-person MOBA market that has been dominated by Smite pretty much forever. So where does it succeed and where does it fall short? After playing around 20 hours of the game, these are my initial thoughts. I'll be breaking this review up into several subsections about different aspects of the game to give it some structure. Feel free to use the timestamps on the timeline bar of the video to jump around as you see fit. Firstly, a quick refresher on what Predecessor is and aims to be for those who have never heard of the project before. If you know what Pred is, you can probably skip this section. Next up, general gameplay and comparisons to Smite, an overview of the item system and how it works, then the character roster, what they have to offer in terms of unique mechanics and how well designed or flawed they are. Next, general balance, and finally I'll cover graphics and optimization, how the game looks and runs. So let's jump in. What is Predecessor? As I mentioned briefly at the start of the video, Pred came to be out of the cancellation of the original Paragon game back in 2018 when Epic Games abandoned the project but released all the assets for the game for free, even free for commercial use, which led to several teams picking up where Epic left off and trying to rebirth Paragon. Predecessor is one of those projects. The game is a third-person action MOBA with different characters covering 5 different roles across a large map, working together as a team to take down enemy towers, inhibitors, and finally their core, which wins you the game. Many of you who watch me for Smite will feel very at home, as this game shares a lot of qualities with its older brother in the space, albeit with its own tweaks. General gameplay. Predecessor revolves around a 3-lane map with 5 roles that will be similar to any MOBA player. The off lane is typically a bruiser or assassin and is often left to 1v1 for around half of the game before grouping up later on. Mid lane is typically a mage or assassin with high burst damage and large areas of effect, and due to the mid lane's central location will be more involved in early fights compared to off lane. The final lane is duo lane, which consists of the carry and the support. The carry is typically high single target damage and is most often a ranger. They will spend some of the time in lane with their support in a 2v2 and the rest just 1v1 versus the other carry before grouping up for teamfights later on. The support is typically a high crowd control and or healer / shielder that will aim to keep their team alive and sometimes create space by frontlining and crowd controlling key enemy targets. And the final player is the jungler, who roams the areas between lanes, taking the monster camps located there to gain powerful buffs as well as XP and gold. The jungler will split their time between taking these camps and ganking lanes to secure kills for their teammates and allow them to push their advantage in lane or recover from a deficit via a jungle gank. One of the most striking differences between Predecessor and other MOBAs is the 3D verticality that it offers. Not many, if any, other MOBAs on the market offer this type of gameplay where one player can be stood significantly above or below their enemy and have that affect the gameplay. For example, if your character has a high jump or teleport, you can reach certain platforms that allow you to get into and out of the jungle area much easier than a character with no jump or teleport. This can aid in escaping enemies if you know they can't follow you up to the ledge. You can also use these abilities to jump or teleport over certain walls to save time or create distance as well. This system is really awesome in my opinion and makes Predecessor feel more like an action game with its freedom of movement. This is one of the game's biggest strengths in my opinion. If anything, I think they should lean even further into the verticality aspect than they already are, with more and higher platforms, raised and lowered terrain in the lanes, etc. Where this verticality is the most apparent though is in the jungle. Pred's jungle is fine. It's nothing crazy and doesn't push boundaries, but it's not bad by any means either. It does what a jungle needs to do, no more, no less. There are 2 buffs, blue and red, both taken by the jungler, some smaller buffs near mid that provide regen and miscellaneous stats like speed, attack speed, damage over time, etc. In my experience, these are mostly taken by the mid, but sometimes the jungler gets them as well. There's also a side camp on each side lane, plus the 2 main objectives of Fangtooth on the duo side and Mini Prime / Orb Prime on the offlane side, with some other small XP and gold camps scattered around the jungle for the jungler to farm. I will say that each camp is at least fairly unique in this game, with some having a swarm of small monsters and others being one single powerful monster, stuff like that. A small feature I really like as well is that minions' health turns a deep red if they're in 1-hit kill range, allowing you to more easily secure those all-important last hits for the bonus gold. Last hitting seems more important than it is in Smite, but not necessarily as important as it is in other MOBAs like Dota or League. Ranged basic attacks in Pred are hit scan, not projectiles, which to me appeared pretty strong in my experience. They of course still have limited range, but against a good player it can be really hard to avoid taking poke from ranged characters if you yourself are melee, and it seems to force you to engage on them and force a fight, otherwise you'll just lose too much health in the poke battle to their near unavoidable basic attacks, to the point where you can no longer feasibly win the trade. This sat a bit weird with me, but I think maybe as I get more experience with the game and its movement, this might become less of an issue. We'll see. The match time in my experience is very long, probably too long. This could be just because I'm new to the game, and really so is everyone, so most teams I get matched with don't really fully know what to do in terms of pushing a lead and ending the game quickly. There are two objectives to take that are similar to Gold Fury and Fire Giant from Smite, enabling your team to better siege the base, etc, but it can be sometimes hard to get your team to actually group up and do these. The same goes for sieging inhibitors and eventually the core. Sometimes my teammates will just wander off and go farm a jungle camp in the middle of a siege, and it can definitely make it hard to end the game, which is definitely playing a part in extending the game times beyond what they normally would be with competent teams on both sides. To be clear, this isn't me complaining about the matchmaking. The game has been out a few days as of recording and I only have about 20 hours of play. It's understandable that matchmaking has very little data on who is a good player and who's not. It's just lumping all new players together regardless because everyone has the same starting MMR. So for example, my Smite experience isn't taken into account and I generally end up in lobbies with people far worse than me who are just learning MOBAs in general. That's just a symptom of the game being just released. But this does result in long game times, upwards of 40 minutes in many of my games that weren't surrendered early. I do think this could come down to between 30 and 35 minutes with more competent teams, but it is still definitely longer games on average than Smite for sure. The general combat in Pred feels pretty crisp, and I often find myself having fun just boxing and last hitting in lane. I'll go more into animations and looks later on in the review, but gameplay wise, the game is just fun to play, straight up. If anything, I think the time to kill is a bit too short and burst is a bit too emphasized, especially in the late game. Granted, I haven't played too many tanks, mostly assassins, mages and some bruisers, but especially later in the match, it feels like one mistake or step out of position means instant death, and I found myself often dying in under 2 seconds just to Carry's basic attacks, never mind all 5 enemies. I personally would prefer a bit longer time to kill to allow more freedom to make risky plays and skill expression rather than one mistake causing you to die in 2 seconds flat and stare at a respawn window for 80 seconds. In comparison to Smite, it's faster than even before the time to kill changes that Smite made to slow it down, so even at Smite's fastest and most bursty, Pred feels faster than that to me. Some people might enjoy this, but for me, I do enjoy the time to kill to be a bit slower. The communication systems could also use some major work in Predecessor. Coming from Smite, which has the VGS system to call out anything and everything you could possibly need in specific detail, Pred feels lacking in that regard. It has pings and a very cumbersome callout system with only a few different options, nothing even close to as good as what Smite has. Communicating with your team easily and not having to type is essential to a MOBA, and Pred needs to work on that. Also, they need to add a post-game lobby to chat with people for sure. Once the game ends, you're just put back to the main menu and never get to see or talk to those teammates again. Overall though, the general gameplay of Predecessor is really fun, and most of the issues I have with it are absolutely fixable and not issues with the core design philosophy of the game. If anything, the core design is its main strength, which does have me hopeful that this early access can be used to really polish the great core that they have here. Item system. Predecessor's item system is solid but not amazing. The item variety is pretty good with many situational counter options like anti-heal, anti-attack speed, anti-tank, etc. already built into the game in generally pretty interesting ways. The item selection pool is also pretty large, which I personally like. It allows for more skill expression and theory crafting to get the edge on your opponent with your superior game knowledge, and I've often found myself making several different build paths work on the same character. I sort of main Feng Mao at the moment, and I've made him work personally with full power, high attack speed, tanky with on-hit effects like dealing a percentage of my health on basic attacks, even a bit cooldown reduction focused, with an item that reduces my cooldown slightly each time I basic attack. Granted, Feng is an offlane fighter, which much like Smite seem to have the most diverse build options and playstyles, and probably mid and carry will have less options in this regard, but the size of the item pool and uniqueness of the items is overall really good. The crest system is something I'm not super enthusiastic about. Basically, you get a crest at the start of the game that upgrades as you do certain tasks like restoring health by killing minions or taking damage or whatever. They're similar to blessings that Smite used to have back in like season 5 and 6. These just seem a bit lackluster compared to the normal items, and I often feel like I would rather sell it and buy a normal item, but since you can't do that, I just find myself taking whatever looks the best of 3 fairly mediocre options. They also have active effects, which I use by pressing 2, which I think is a cool feature, and I think relegating this to just one item in your crest is a good idea, rather than having every single item have an active effect, as that can just get a bit too difficult to manage. Think of these kind of like relics from Smite in a certain way. I just wish these active effects were a bit stronger and more unique. Since you only get one crest, I think they should work like Smite starter items where they're significantly more powerful and almost build defining when upgraded, but they seem more like ancillary unnecessary things tacked on that are actually worse in stats to a lot of regular items. Everyone also gets a really long cooldown blink when you press 4, which I really like. It somewhat equalizes the movement disparity between characters that do and don't have a dash, since at the very least, no dash characters can use the blink, albeit with a massively longer cooldown than a traditional dash. This blink can also be used to get up onto platforms or over walls in the jungle, like I mentioned in the gameplay section. Overall, the item system is pretty solid. It doesn't push any boundaries really, and is pretty reminiscent of Smite's item system, especially back in the Blessing days given their similarities to crests in Predecessor, but having an item system that is close to Smite in terms of depth is a good start, considering the game literally just launched. Smite's item system back in 2012 was not this good, so credit where credit is due, but it could use some small improvements here and there. Heroes and variety. Moving on to heroes, this I think is one of the weaker aspects of Predecessor. While the item system is quite in depth and provides a lot of skill expression, the heroes themselves are a bit lacking in this regard and most of them seem a tad basic. It's definitely possible they wanted to play it safe and not have any crazy heroes at the launch of early access, but a lot of them seem to just be basic damage abilities, basic dash movement, etc. I think there could be some more depth to them overall. Now granted, I haven't played every hero and it's possible I've just missed some of the deep and complex ones, but overall they do seem a tad shallow. That's not to say they're not fun though. I have enjoyed quite a few of the heroes I've tried, especially Feng Mao, who I mentioned has kind of become my main at this point in both offlane and jungle at the moment. There are currently 20 heroes in the game, which I think is a decent launch number, perhaps slightly on the small side. I think 25 would have been nicer to have around 5 for each role, though of course some can play multiple roles like I mentioned, with Feng being viable in both jungle and offlane. I can imagine new hero releases should come in early access after the kinks and major bugs have been ironed out to smooth the rest of the gameplay over, and I'm hoping they'll dip their toe into some slightly more complex designs akin to some League and Dota champions. At the moment, they're similar in complexity to Smite's gods, maybe a little bit more basic, and I've been calling for more deep character designs in Smite for a while, so I'd love to see some come to Predecessor as well. Given how Smite developed, I think it's likely we will see champions get a bit more complex and out of the box as the game progresses, just as Smite's gods did. You didn't see gods like Yamoja, Original Persephone, or the Morrigan until years into Smite's life. At launch, many of the gods, if not all of the gods, were fairly basic, which does give me hope for the future of this roster in Predecessor. Visually, I also think they lack in differentiation and personality a little bit. Some are really great for this, like a lot of the beasts, but there does seem to be a bit of an abundance of generic badass or attractive humans with no real personality. It's possible I'm being too critical here since I'm coming from Smite, which has really cool character designs by default given they're based on mythology, and they also have their own voice pack with hundreds of lines that add to their personality. Pred doesn't have that at the moment, and I think it would add a lot to the game to do that. Balance. So I'm only going to spend a small amount of time on balance. Firstly, because I don't really have enough time in the game to accurately judge what is and isn't strong or weak. It could just be that I'm a noob and I don't know counters for certain things, so take my opinion with a grain of salt, though I am highly experienced in Smite and some of that does translate over to Pred. And secondly, the game has been out a few days as of recording. I don't expect the game to be well balanced out of the gate, and this is something that a competent dev team can easily fix within just a few weeks or months of launch. It's not a systemic issue in the core game's philosophy or anything like that. With that said though, the game does seem a little bit wonky on balance sometimes. Crunch is a standout that seems to be one of, if not the best character in the game at the moment. With no equivalent to purification beads like Smite has, CC chains are incredibly deadly in Predecessor, and Crunch has the damage to back up 2 stuns that can dish out in rapid succession. It seems like a good Crunch can literally 0 to death reliably even with a small lead, which seems a bit ridiculous to me, especially considering there's no system like Smite's DR to prevent those CCs being so deadly. Also, carries in general just seem pretty insane, with the whole hit scan basic attacks thing and seemingly strong itemization. Once a carry gets late game, they seem near unstoppable, which I get is sort of the idea of the role, but I think it does go a little too far at the moment and leads to a lot of those 4-shot kills and instant deaths I was talking about in the time to kill section when I was on about gameplay. Towers also seem really weak, not in the damage they do seem to deal fairly high damage, but in how little HP they have. It seems like one wave is easily enough to take a tower for almost any character in the game, and even an inhibitor at almost any point, meaning often one kill in the lane means the tower is gone and it snowballs from there. But yeah, as I said, I don't want to harp too much on balance since the game is so young and I don't have the full experience required to make accurate judgments on the balance of it, so I'll leave it there. There seems to be some glaring issues, but they're not super widespread. Graphics and optimization. So let's talk a bit about how the game looks and runs. After all, it's not just the gameplay we look for in a new game. The graphics, much like the original Paragon, take a blend of fantasy and realism that works really well in my opinion. The quality of the assets is solid, especially the environment design. I could spend half the game just wandering the map seeing all the cool sights there are to see. In fact, it's a huge benefit of playing jungle, so I can just enjoy a chill time farming camps while looking at the amazing scenery in between. Animations are pretty much all super smooth, and I've only had a few minor issues like character models freezing in certain positions until I jump or cast a skill, but I'm sure those issues will be ironed out relatively quickly, and in general the animation quality is top notch. Your characters really do feel powerful when using skills and even basic attacks, and combined with the great sound design, it makes even just last hitting and lane a beauty to behold. In terms of optimization, it's okay. I've heard a lot of people praising the optimization of Predecessor, but for me it just runs okay. Not great, not terrible. It seems to be a bit of a resource hog, and while I can run it on very good settings when just playing, if I try to also record my gameplay, the game itself eats a lot of my resources and my recording software sometimes drops frames unless I lower the settings in game. If the background footage here looks a bit lower quality than maybe you've seen yourself, that's probably why. I have a better than average gaming PC and run the game off of an SSD, but it does seem to still have some performance issues. Although one thing I will praise is that it never really stutters. If anything, I just get a consistent but somewhat low frame rate the entire time, which is definitely better than getting 100 FPS sometimes but dropping to 20 mid-fight. In general, the performance is very stable, and despite playing in the first few days of launch, I didn't have any server-related connectivity issues either, so overall I'm pretty happy with the optimization, but I think it could be improved. The game is definitely much harder to run than Smite, that's for sure. Conclusion. But yeah, that's all I have for my early access review of Predecessor. So far, I'm pretty impressed with the game. The core gameplay is really fun, it looks and sounds amazing, and differentiates itself enough from competitors like Smite or League that it can stand on its own, and in my opinion, will garner its own following. Rather than killing Smite, I think it will find its own niche and both games will coexist. Each has its strengths and weaknesses. Smite has a strong mythology base and more interesting characters, but Predecessor has a cooler map design, better overall look, and the verticality going for it. In terms of future prospects for the game, the devs have already announced several core features that they plan to bring to the game throughout early access, like player profiles, progression systems, ranked play, and a store, but they said that perfecting the core gameplay comes first and additional features like that will come after. Console development is also underway and will have full crossplay with PC, but no date is yet announced by the devs. But what do you guys think of Predecessor? Have you tried it? And if not, are you interested in giving it a try? Leave your own thoughts down below, and I will catch you guys in another one later on. Have a great day, and peace out, you nerds.